Good morning, everyone. This is the Leafs Convo podcast. I'm Norman James, along with Mike Augello. Of course, we present this podcast for Vanguard Northeast Realty in Scarborough, vanguardne.ca. Michael, how was media availability / locker cleanout?
Good morning, Norman. It was quite revealing and in points quite controversial if you talk about the comments of the general manager and the head coach or lack thereof. It was fairly surprising. I mean, I can tick off a number of different things said by the players. The first one, because that was the first guy who we spoke to, was Patrick Marleau. It doesn't sound like he's retiring. He wants to be back for his third year. He likes being with the group. And honestly, I don't think the Leafs organization is going to push him out because of the influence and, the taking under his wing that he's done with Matthews and Marner. You don't want to upset your two-star players. And I think, prematurely saying, you've got to go, Patrick, is probably not going to be the way to go. So, and he's got a no-move clause. So I don't think it's going to work in terms of them saying, unless he has a change of heart and a little late, a couple weeks down the road, he says, you know what, I'm going to hang him up. I don't think he's retiring. I think he's coming back for next year. And that's going to cause some ripple effects and some domino effects when it comes to the salary cap.
What do the fans want, Mike? Will Kyle Dubas consult with the fans? Because after Game 7 and even throughout this series with Boston, fans were advising Kyle Dubas, it's time to pull the plug on Patrick Marleau because, look, he's older, but they know, right? I mean, I don't think they understand. A lot of fans understand that there's more to it than just pushing somebody off the cliff because you think they've lost a step.
I get the impression, and I'm not saying this, that he said this or said it directly or said it with any kind of arrogance, but Kyle Dubas is going to do what Kyle Dubas is going to do. He has a belief system in what he envisions for this club, and he's going to operate on that. I think he's going to do his utmost to sort of block out the noise, the opinions of, the fans and, some members in the media. I mean, there's not everything that I personally agree with. I respect Kyle Dubas, but there's not, everything he does is not something that I 100% agree with, but he's the boss. He's the general manager of this team. So he is going to operate the way he wants to operate. Now, the interesting thing that was brought up was when one reporter asked, can you confirm or can you guarantee that Mike Babcock and Nazem Kadri will be back next year? The answer from Dubas was very deft, and in the sense that he said, well, my job has got to be reviewed by Brendan Shanahan, and then once that, everything is under review. He didn't answer, which immediately brought, well, okay, if he's not answering, you'd think he'd say, yes, he's going to be back. By him not saying, yes, he's going to be back, that throws doubt. That throws a little shade into the situation when it comes to, what's the future of Mike Babcock. Now, I reiterate my belief, he's 100% going to be back. But I think right now the fans may not want to hear 100% he's going to be back because of, what he did or didn't do in the first round series against the Bruins.
The team needed savvy to beat the Boston Bruins from the head coach. They didn't get it. But if you think it's just Mike Babcock who is ailing this team, you're insane. And every time I see a list that says get rid of Mike Babcock, but William Nylander is going to look great with Austin Matthews next season, this drives home my point that fans don't want to win a Stanley Cup. They just want to adore their favorite players.
The thing yesterday that was presented, and it was clear, and the reaction afterward made it so, was that Kyle Dubas owned the problems of this team. He took responsibility for the holdout of Nylander, or the impasse with Nylander, even though I think, he sort of fell on the sword there because I think that was more creation of Nylander and his dad and agent Louis Gross. Dubas owned that. He owned the fact that, there were some shortcomings on the roster, like with, penalty killers. I mean, you think the minor deal that they made with Par Lindholm for Nick Patan wasn't a factor. Par Lindholm was a penalty killer. He was a decent penalty killer, and he was a good face-off guy. And once Zach Hyman had his injury in Game 4, he couldn't win face-offs because he was playing on one leg. and that was a factor in terms of the Bruins power play being effective. But Dubas owned it. Dubas said, "I'm responsible. The buck stops here. I will do my level best to adjust in my second year." Meaning, like he's going to prioritize Mitch Marner's contract as priority number one, as opposed to Mike Babcock, who, I mean, basically didn't take accountability for anything. I mean, it was sort of, I mean, well, we didn't have this and we didn't have that, and I didn't think he owned any of the loss. And John Shannon from Sportsnet was on yesterday and talked about it, and I thought he nailed it, where he said, well, Mike is very deft, he's very good with the media, but when you talk about accountability and he doesn't take any, it sort of rings hollow. And it was almost sort of arrogance that he wouldn't take ownership of the problems of this team. I mean, I'm sorry, there was a question asked about Austin Matthews and ice time, and they didn't even, he sort of said, well, he had the same amount of shifts. It's like, okay, no, he didn't play as much in a game where you were behind by a goal and 2 goals in the third period. He played as much as William Nylander, and I'm sorry, that's just not acceptable. So I think that Kyle Dubas came out after that and basically, I think, owned everything, in contrast to what Babcock really didn't do it. And I get the feeling that he did that in part, and this is just my feeling, that he did that in part because Babcock didn't do it, and maybe he's sending a signal that you're not so safe. You got to remember, I'm the general manager and you're the coach, and if I have the support of Brendan Shanahan and I want to fire you, I can do it.
Does Dubas have the support of Brendan Shanahan? When is Brendan Shanahan going to face the media? Because I think he's the boss, Mike. He is the boss. And I hope Kyle Dubas is held in check, too. Where was the left side defenseman? Where was the rugged forward that was needed? Why are we placating William Nylander? That's what I want to know. Mike Babcock, he's on his own. I'm a Mike Babcock fan. But his deployment of the lines in that series against Boston, especially down the stretch, his stubbornness. I saw the question about, I listened to the question and I posted it on the community platform, asked to him, and I don't know, are the Toronto media, do they have any balls or what? Do they get in this guy's face like they would in Philly or Boston or whatever? Because I see a lot of chatter on Twitter and I never see the confrontation develop in the media room. This was what happened with Randy Carlyle over and over, but I digress. Mike Babcock getting offended or touchy about, you're the media and you represent the fans represent you, and we're going to stay solid in this room no matter what you guys say. I mean, it was a real defensive kind of amateurish answer that Mike Babcock gave to the media. So I understand this guy's on his own, but spare me the stuff about Kyle Dubas being some iconic boy wonder who has wizardry and is able to, he touches everything and it turns to gold. Like, I haven't seen that. Let's kind of look at the entire organization here and say you all have issues here. You're all complicit with the problems of this team. Where's Brendan Shanahan? When is this guy going to step up and say, look, I got a great general manager who's got a lot of talent, but there are some things he needs to learn. And I got a head coach here who I need to take into a room with a bottle of whiskey and maybe roll up our sleeves a little bit and get him to understand that this isn't 2009. This isn't Team Canada. He's going to have to adapt.
Well, you're probably not going to hear Brendan Shanahan until the NHL draft or until July. Now that locker clean out, now that the end of the season pressers have happened, there's not going to be really any avenue for availability. I grant your point. It's like, it's not like Kyle Dubas is on Mount Olympus. It's not like he's not an untouchable, but I think he has the confidence of Brendan Shanahan. He was Brendan Shanahan's choice as general manager. You have to assume that after 1 year, even though he said, my job is going to be reviewed as well, he's very safe in terms of his position as general manager of this team. Mike Babcock has been now there for 4 years, 3 first-round eliminations.
True.
You continue to see, when he is provided with players from both Lou Lamoriello and Kyle Dubas, that he doesn't play them because he doesn't want to, or he doesn't think that they fit in the construct of this team. And he constantly asks for players that the general manager, like, the Luke Glendening situation, which has been rumored for 2 years, that he's tried to get him at the deadline, and both general managers didn't say, yes, I'll go, yes, sir, and go out and get him. I mean, that's where the meeting of the minds has to happen with the Leafs. Babcock and Dubas have to get on the same page. If they are not getting on the same page where I'm going to trade for a guy and you have to play him, well, no, he doesn't have to play him. He has control of the roster. That means both of them have to get together and say, okay, what guy do you want that we can get that'll help the team and that is acceptable to my idea of the team? That's what they have to do. Whether that's going to happen or not, I have no idea.
This is the Leafs Convo podcast for Vanguard Northeast Realty in Scarborough. Visit them at vanguardne.ca. What else stood out to you, Mike?
To me, the comments of Jake Gardiner after, at locker cleanout ringed very well. It sounded very similar to the comments of Tyler Bozak and James Van Riemsdyk last year, talking about, his tenure with the Leafs and how proud he is of the team from where it was when he joined to where it was now. I mean, they just ringed it. It just sounded like it was a farewell speech. And I pretty much think it is. I know, in spite of the fact that Morgan Riley, again, came to his defense because he's one of his best friends and was, calling the media and the fans to the carpet because of their criticism of him. I'm sorry. Yeah, he is a good player, but he's a flawed player, and he's going to be on the market, along with Erik Karlsson and Tyler Myers, and he's going to get $6 million a year offer from somebody, and the Leafs simply can't afford it. So it's more like that. Not that they don't want to bring him back. I think they can't bring him back unless they, make other deals in other areas to clear things. So I just got the feeling that it was a farewell speech.
You brought up Tyler Myers. We wanted to pitch Gardiner for Myers last season. We did a whole podcast about it. Search it, folks. You can find it, or I'll pop a link up if I have time. What about Tyler Myers? Maybe he could become the Leafs' own Zdeno Chara light.
Well, the problem is he's going to expect the same type of money in free agency that it would take to keep Gardiner. So I think that's a no. I mean, I honestly think, and the other potential retiree was Ron Hainsey, and in typical friendly Ron Hainsey fashion, he basically said, "Well, I don't know if I'm retiring or not, and if I did, I wouldn't tell you guys."
So he wasn't terrible in the playoffs at all. I mean, what is he supposed to do? He did what he could, right?
Sure. But I mean, Ron Hainsey is sort of central to the sort of Babcock Dubas dynamic because Hainsey is a Babcock player. Babcock trusts him. He's a veteran. He likes him. Dubas, I don't think, dislikes him, and I think if he could bring him back for a year at like a little bit lesser of a salary, I think he would do it. But the problem is, I think Dubas would want Babcock to use him less, to use him as a bottom pairing guy, to have him be sort of a teacher to somebody like Travis Dermott or Timothy Liljegren or whatever young kid they bring up next year. And if Babcock gets his hands on him again, he's going to put him on the top pairing with Morgan Riley because he doesn't trust the young guys. And that's, there's going to have to be a little bit of pain here when it comes to Babcock, letting these guys play and making their mistakes.
Nothing's changed here, Mike. We've talked about how Ron Hainsey should be a complimentary player. But who do you put at the top of the defensive unit list? Timothy Liljegren, because he's the young guy and he's a Dubas guy? Would it be Rasmus Sandin just goes right to the top? It's not about, well, Dubas's guys aren't getting the time. Dubas's guys are great, but they're not ready to become top players, especially if you're trying to win a Stanley Cup. Neither is Ron Hainsey. I agree. So what are you going to do? And I have a feeling, to be honest with you, these veterans move out and it's all about young players next year. How are the Leafs going to improve on what they did this year? With a defensive core that's less seasoned than the one that just demonstrated it's actually wasn't too bad in the playoffs, but it demonstrated it needs improvement. When you actually take it back with better talent, but younger players and less pedigree and less experience, I'm not sure how you can say in any which way or form that team to come will be more ready to win a Stanley Cup than the team we just saw?
Well, the shorter answer is if they're bringing up Kali Rosen and Sandin and Liljegren all at the same time, which I don't think they'll bring them all up. I think, Rosen will be on the top six. Liljegren has a chance to make the team at training camp. I went to the Marlies game on Wednesday, and he's grown, and he's a more solid defenseman than he was a year ago. He'll probably start out as a bottom pairing guy, but I think he could be ready for the NHL next year. Sandin may need a little more time. But to answer your question, who's on the top pairing if Hainsey isn't? Well, that's the guy that you get in the trade when you trade a William Nylander or a Kasper Kapanen. Yeah, you trade from your strength. Well, you may have to, depending on his salary demand and depending on whether Kyle Dubas decides he wants to keep William Nylander, or he says, okay, he's less valued now because of a bad year. Let's give him a fresh start next year. And, of course, that's what Nylander was talking about, was a fresh start and getting off on the right foot, and how it was a mistake that he held, or that there was a contract impasse, trying to smooth things over. And, great. That's all fine and good. But, where were you when you were paid over $10 million? You scored 7 goals. So, you can't sort of whitewash this season and say, okay, everything is beautiful. Well, no, it's not, because you were paid basically almost on the level of John Tavares, and you didn't produce. And I think he still has value. I think they could make that trade, but I don't know whether there is a hunger to do it right now, which might mean the eventual departure of Nazem Kadri.
Whether he's back with the Leafs or not, and he's traded or facilitated a new opportunity, it doesn't make a huge difference to me. I and listeners of this podcast understand this, who are at least consistent listeners. All I care about is this team winning a Stanley Cup. That's it. Whatever it takes to win a Stanley Cup. I am still not convinced Kyle Dubas's goal right now is to win a Stanley Cup. I don't think, again, when you're going all in on guys like Nylander.
I think Kyle Dubas wants to win a Stanley Cup. I think that's his goal, but I think he has a belief system on what a team that is capable of winning the Stanley Cup needs to be. And I think that he wants to do it his way. Now, I think, like everything in life, it's a compromise. I think he's got to alter his point of view a little bit. I think that this team needs to get bigger. There needs to be more sandpaper. There needs to be some better defensive players. You can't play simply an offensive game. And, to their credit, they tightened up defensively in a series against the Bruins, but they simply weren't deep enough, and they simply weren't talented enough in the right places. And they had some key injuries as well. Now, the one last thing that I'll mention in terms of locker cleanout was, I thought the comment of Mitch Marner regarding, wanting to stay in Toronto, wanting to be there long term, and Dubas's comments about him being priority number one and getting anything done before July 1st, you can basically put away the concerns, even though it was being whipped up yesterday. You can put away the concerns of an sheet. Please. Because unless Darren Ferris, who's Marner's agent, is going to say we're going to push for every dollar we can get by waiting until late June to start negotiations, I don't think that's the case. I think Dubas basically said, I'm going to give Darren a call tomorrow, and we're going to get moving on this. I think they're going to be proactive. I think they're going to pay through the nose for him. He deserves it. He's a great player. But I think they're going to get it done because they have to get that done before they can make any other moves for the offseason.
Think about the Nylander situation. Louis Gross, selfish, greedy, but he's doing what he has to do. The father, selfish, greedy, but he's doing what he has to do. Where are those guys? Where were those guys when William Nylander showed up to Toronto? Nowhere. They got paid. They were satisfied. The poor kid had to deal with the nonsense, and he's still dealing with it. Is Darren Ferris going to, after seeing that, going to unfurl a template that Mitch Marner may have to follow that puts his reputation potentially next season in peril? I hope Ferris learned the lessons from what Gross facilitated with William Nylander, and they figure this thing out. All the talk about want to play in Toronto, all the talk I want to be here, then, you're going to make tons of money. You're going to make tons of money down the line too. This isn't one final cash grab for a kid who's 21? Make it happen. I am a Mitch Marner guy, okay? But if they attempt to go down that road that William Nylander and his crew went down and cause problems for this Maple Leafs team, and he's not joining the team till November, I won't be a Marner guy anymore. I'm sorry. I love the Leafs over Leafs. Final word to you, Mike, and then I've got to go.
Yeah, well, I think it's going to be a very interesting and very tumultuous summer because there's going to be some tough decisions that have to be made, and I think that Kyle Dubas is going to make them in concert with his staff and with Brendan Shanahan and maybe with Mike Babcock. I just think that yesterday I went into locker cleanout and the end of the season pressers thinking Mike Babcock was 100% going to be back. And now it's more like 95. And that little shred of doubt is more than I expected, but we'll see. I still think he's going to be behind the bench in September at training camp, but it's not 100% sure.
This team does not need a coaching change in November or December, Mike. In this market, forget about it. That's not going to do it. Make your decision now. I'm pissed off with Mike Babcock. I'm not exactly impressed with Kyle Dubas. I could care less if William Nylander's traded. I want to see Mitch Marner be smart and get his next contract in order. I think this team still needs some more veteran presence, a little more toughness. If it plans on contending for a Stanley Cup next season, I want to see some of the young guys come up. In terms of a captain, I don't know, really. Does the team really need a captain? If you put it on Morgan Riley, which would be an appropriate choice, does Austin Matthews start pouting? Does he deserve it? There's a lot of things that will unfold over the days, weeks, and months ahead. I can't see anybody being overly thrilled with what's going on right now, and I'm just a microcosm of that. I'm an example of that. But I'll cheer up the same way you will, and we all will. Vlad Guerrero in Toronto tonight. Should be fun. We'll do a baseball podcast soon. Michael, thanks, bud.
Thanks, Norman.
We would like to thank Vanguard Northeast Realty in Scarborough, title sponsor of the Leafs Convo, demonstrating passion for the industry and a superior level of excellence in selling, leasing, and marketing your property. Vanguard Northeast Realty.